call you all to order. That would be good. Well, it's lovely to be here with you all and to see many familiar faces and some not so familiar, but it's good to be here amongst you all. And I think this is going to be a good day. The order has changed slightly because Jude Curran has been flying in from Toronto this morning. And of course, things have got slightly delayed, but she is on her way. So I'm going to go first, and she'll come on later in the morning. But and you are? I'm Don MacGregor, yeah. And I live out in Pembrokeshire in St David's. And I've been a Church in Wales vicar out there for many years. Recently retired. Yes! But I was a science teacher before becoming an Anglican priest. And I longed to see the day when there would be scientific theories that actually tied together science and spirituality. But I doubted it would ever happen and be accepted. But we're now at the beginning of that process, and this new story is emerging. A story of the acceptance that science and spirituality are not opposing worldviews, but are actually two sides of the same coin. To me, that's exciting, fantastic. Well, in fact, not fantastic, it's totally believable. Jude is going to present us, when she gets here, with the viewpoint that the universe is in fact a cosmic hologram, which is the title of her recent book. Intricately interconnected in a series of kind of nested hierarchies of energy, repeating patterns with the same essence of information flowing through them all. Gradually, there's a new way of seeing that this physical plane in which we dwell and it's moving us from the materialistic viewpoint, which says that matter is all there is, and that consciousness kind of pops out of the brain when the brain is developed enough. The new science story says that consciousness, or mind, has to exist before matter. If anybody wants to look at it further, that's a very good book, Mind Before Matter. Now, people like physics Professor Amit Goswami in the States have been saying for years that consciousness is the ground of being, from which everything materializes at the quantum level, and that there's only one universal consciousness. Many familiar names have said the same thing. It's familiar names in the scientific world. I'm covering a little bit of the science, but Jude's going to go much further later. But Erwin Schrödinger, who you might have heard of, quantum physicist, Nobel Prize award-winning quantum physicist, says consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental. It cannot be accounted for in terms of anything else. Sir Arthur Eddington, a founding father of the new physics, said the stuff of the universe is mind stuff. And Eric Jansch, who's an astrophysicist, he said, God is not the creator, but the mind of the universe. Physicist and mathematician Sir Roger Penrose says, my position on consciousness demands a major revolution in physics. I've come to believe that there is something very fundamental missing from current science. Our understanding at this time is not adequate, and we're going to have to move to new regions of science. Basically, scientists can't really get a hold on consciousness. It's as if it exists outside the known laws of the universe and reality as we know it. And maybe it's going to be the next scientific breakthrough that starts to join up those dots. And I think this is what Jude is on the edge of. Physicists like John Bell and Alain Aspect, famous names in the physics world, they've established that the universe, at its most basic level, is non-local. It's a kind of slightly scientific term. But they're saying that information doesn't travel from A to B because it doesn't need to travel anywhere, it exists everywhere. It's kind of weird. This presents us, though, with a view of a kind of participatory universe in which everything is interconnected, everything's interdependent. A seamless whole of mind stuff, i.e. consciousness. In her book, Jude puts it like this: we are each individuated microcosms of the holographic intelligence of our universe and ultimately of the infinite and eternal mind of the cosmos. Now, Buddhism uses a similar image to describe the interconnectedness of all phenomena. It's called Indra's net. And the story goes that when Indra fashioned the world, he made it as a web. And at every knot in the web, a pearl is tied. And everything that exists or has ever existed, every idea that can be thought about, every piece of true information is a pearl in Indra's net. Every pearl is tied to every other pearl by virtue of the web on which they hang. And on the surface of every pearl is the reflection of every other jewel on the net. So everything that exists in Indra's net implies that all else exists. And this is kind of the new story of science in Buddhism, that we're all part of the one consciousness which holds everything in being, permeates everything, and is the one life in which we live and move and have our being, to quote St. Paul. We are all one. We're not just with the rest of humanity, but with the whole of the biosphere and actually the whole of the universe. To quote Jude again, shame she's not here, I'm quoting her well here. Consciousness isn't just something we have, it's what we and the whole world are. Consciousness isn't just something we have, it's what we and the whole world are. And this is the nub of it, this is the crux of it. And this is what mystics and religious have been saying for millennia in their own language and their own understanding. Their understanding is based on human experience, something possible for all humanity. Not everyone's had that particular human experience, but for those who have, it's totally life-changing. What is it? It's when we're taken up in feeling and knowing of such awe and wonder that we know that we are one with everything and that we are held in love. It's the mystical experience that's been common to various people down through the ages. Experience of being at one with the divine, or unity awareness, you could call it, or oneness. It is a normal human experience, something possible for anyone to have, given the right conditions, the right state of mind, and so on. But then those human experiences are interpreted in the understanding of the time and the culture and the context of that person who's experienced it. So the articulation of those experiences, how people explain them to others, takes on the clothing of the religious and the moral system of the time. The problem is we can mistake the clothing for the actual inner human experience, which leads us to imagine differences where actually none exist. It becomes the problem of language and people using language in different ways. So I'm going to take you through a lot of quotes. Now these quotes from various religious of the past will be on the sheets that you'll get at the end of this day. So you don't have to write them all down. There's more on the sheets than I'm going to show you, actually. But there is going to be a pack for you at the end of the day. But these quotes I've selected to show you how this interconnected oneness has been said for thousands of years. and said by a few, not heard by most, or if heard, then not really believed. And that's the problem. And yet now science is beginning to say the same, albeit in its own language. What it's saying is that there is an inherent oneness to the whole of the universe. So here we go with the quotes, and they're in the pack, so don't worry. Going back to some of the earliest religious writers, we have the Upanishads from India. The Mindiha Upanishad says, "The self is all-knowing, it is all-understanding, and it belongs to all glory. It is pure consciousness, dwelling in the hearts of all." The Chandogya Upanishad, "In the beginning was only being, one without a second. Out of himself," selectist language, I have to explain that, excuse that. "Out of itself," maybe, "he brought forth the cosmos and entered into everything in it. There is nothing that does not come from him. Of everything, he is the inmost self." It's all within. The Isha Upanishad, "When a man realizes that all beings are his own self, there is no further grief and delusion for him, because he is established in the unity of the individual and the cosmic soul." They're all saying the same essence. The Svetasvatara Upanishad, "God is one, hidden in all beings, all-pervading, the self within all selves, watching over all doing, dwelling in all being, the witness, the perceiver, the single one, free from all qualities." So that's some of the earliest of the religious writings. A little bit later, the Buddha came and he said, "He who experiences the unity of life sees his own self in all beings." So that's this oneness. We realize that we are all one, and from that has to come love and compassion for each other. It's got to be the way forward. In China, Lao Tzu, or Lao Tzu, it seems to be spelled different ways, he said, "Can you dissolve your ego? Can you abandon the idea of self and other? Can you relinquish the notions of male and female, short and long, life and death? Can you let go of these dualities and embrace the Tao without skepticism or panic? If so, you can reach the heart of the integral oneness." It's amazing when you see across the different traditions this sort of same thing being said. Slightly later, back in India, we have the Bhagavad Gita. "The whole world is pervaded by me," this is God speaking, "yet my form is not seen. All things have their being in me, yet I am not limited by them." This is Krishna, isn't it? If you like, the cosmic Christ. Back in China, we moved on. Heraclitus. The Greeks had a special word called henosis, the word for mystical oneness or unity. And in Platonism, and especially in Neoplatonism, the goal of henosis is union with what is fundamental in reality. And Heraclitus was a pre-Socratic Greek, a philosopher from Ephesus, just outside Ephesus. And he said, "From out of the many particulars comes oneness, and out of the oneness come all the many particulars." That's us and everything around us. So we can reach the Hebrew scriptures. God said to Moses, "I am who I am." at the burning bush. He said further, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you." Now the Hebrew understanding of this text is that God is all that is. God is all that is happening at every moment. God is I am, not being, not a being, or even a supreme being, but beingness itself. Beingness itself. And again, we have the same thing sort of restated in the prophet Isaiah. God saying, "I am the one who is," with the letters Yahweh again. There is nothing else. There is nothing else. Everything is the divine. So we get to the Christian era. Jesus says, may they be one in John's Gospel, as we are one. This is Jesus and the Father, as he called his relationship with God. I in them and you in me, that they may become completely one. It's this awakening to that realization that has to happen. In the Gospel of Thomas, we find it put in another way. This is one of the Nag Hammadi texts, now thought to contain some of the earliest sayings, even as early as the writings of St. Paul, or even slightly earlier. But in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "Lift the stone and you will find me. Cleave the wood and I am there." In other words, the divine is everywhere, is in everything. If we go a little further, St. Paul, of course, I mentioned earlier, in God we live and move and have our being. He said in Athens, when he was talking about the unknown God that they had a monument to, he said, actually, the one we know is the God in whom we live and move and have our being. Little later, in the 2nd century, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, he was emperor from 161 to 180. He was the last of the rulers traditionally known as the 5 good emperors. There weren't many of them who were good. He was called a philosopher as well. He said, and this is amazing for his time, "All things are linked with one another, and this oneness is sacred. There is nothing that is not interconnected with everything else. For things are interdependent, and they combine to form this universal order." Jumping to China. I'm not going to pronounce it. I could have a go. Zhang Zhishengkan, something like that. But he's the 3rd patriarch of Zen. When the 10,000 things are viewed in their oneness, we return to the origin and remain where we have always been. One in all and all in one. If only this is realized, no more worry about not being perfect. But the 10,000 things are everything in existence, but they're to be viewed in their oneness. Going on into the Christian mystics now. Hildegard of Bingen lived from 1098 to 1179. She was a German Benedictine abbess, writer, composer, philosopher, Christian mystic, musician, visionary, polymath, quite a woman. She said this in her writings, "I," God speaking, "I am life itself, for I am the whole of life. Life was not torn from stones, it did not bud from branches, nor is it rooted in the generative power of the male. Rather, every living thing is rooted in me. I am the life that remains the same through eternity." And she also said, "Everything that is in the heavens, on earth, and under the earth is penetrated with connectedness, penetrated with relatedness." It's See, she's another of these mystics who had that vision of oneness and knew, absolutely knew it was true. A little later, we have Meister Eckhart, German theologian, philosopher, mystic. In later life, he was accused of heresy and brought before the local Franciscan-led Inquisition and tried as a heretic by Pope John the 22nd. But kind of fortunately for him, he died before his verdict was received. So what his verdict might have been, we don't know. But he said this: "I give you still another thought, which is yet purer and more spiritual. In the kingdom of heaven, all is in all is one, and all is ours." A little later, well, not around the same time, in fact, John van Ruysbroek, a Flemish mystic, Johann is, and this is an amazing image. He's virtually saying the universe is kind of holographic, an amazing statement. The image of God is found essentially and personally in all. Each of us possesses it in whole, entire, and undivided, and all of us together do not possess it more than one person does alone. In this way, we are all one, intimately united in our eternal image, which is the image of God. 800 years ago. Stunning when you put these all together. I was kind of flabbergasted myself as I was doing it. A little later, in the Ukraine in the 1700s, Jewish mysticism this time, from Rabbi Heller: "There is nothing in the world other than God, and God's emanated powers, which are a unity. Other than that, nothing exists. Although it seems that there are other things, everything is really God and the divine emanations." So they're all saying the same sort of thing, aren't they? They're all saying the same thing. We can come to more contemporary writers, and it's still there in the 1800s now. William James. This overcoming of all the usual barriers between the individual and the absolute is the great mystic achievement. In mystic states, we both become one with the absolute, and we become aware of our oneness. This is the everlasting and triumphant mystical tradition, hardly altered by differences of clime and creed. As we've just seen, we've looked through 2,000 years nearly of statements saying more or less the same thing from all sorts of different parts of the world. Back to India again, Swami Vivekananda. "All differences in this world are of degree and not of kind, because oneness is the secret of everything." I like that. That's the late 1800s he was saying this. And then we have, hopefully, Gandhi saying, "I believe in the absolute oneness of God and therefore also of humanity. What though we have many bodies? We have but one soul." So at some level he's saying there is this integral oneness. Contemporary with Einstein was actually Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Oh, sorry, I missed one. Oh, I seem to have lost that one. Oh no, we got Albert Einstein next. He wrote this in a private letter to somebody who was bereaved, in fact. But he said, "A human being is part of a whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. And then contemporary with Einstein was Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He said, "We are one after all, you and I. Together we suffer, together exist, and forever we'll recreate each other." I haven't touched in on Islam yet. So here we go. Contemporary writer, Llewellyn Vaughan Lee, Sufi teacher, of course, the mystical arm of Islam. "This oneness is life, no longer experienced solely through the fragmented vision of the ego, but known within the heart, felt in the soul. This oneness is the heartbeat of life." And this one heartbeat of life is also recognized within the ecological movement. The self, people are beginning to see in deep ecology, is no longer an isolated, separate individual. We exist in this living biosphere in which we share with all other species. So we get people like Joanna Macy saying the ecological self is coextensive with other beings and with the life of our planet. It is what I will call the greening of the self. And this is her big idea, that the greening of the self means that we realize that we are one with all the biosphere and all other living beings. Another contemporary writer, Tim Freke, says, the evolutionary journey has been leading us to a state of communication with the love light of spirit, which is an experience of all-consuming oneness and all-embracing compassion. So I think we are evolving into an awareness of oneness and compassion as the way ahead. The mystics and seers and pioneers have always been dancers on the edge of this idea, dancing on the edge of orthodoxy, trying to stay just within its bounds. Otherwise, in the past, of course, they could be condemned as heretics and then outcast, at worst burnt at the stake, or hung, drawn and quartered, or decapitated, whatever. But they're on the edge because they've seen something which is hard to put into words, but which they know, it's seared into their hearts and minds, that we are one with the divine essence which permeates and holds everything. They couch their writing in acceptable terms for the times that they lived in, so that they don't get into too much trouble. And they call this divine essence by different terms: spirit, soul, all-being, consciousness. Some people these days just call it the universe, the source. But what we're talking about actually is an ageless teaching, an ageless perennial wisdom, a universal spirituality that has been taught down through the ages. It isn't unique to any specific system of thought or belief, but rather it's like an underlying ethos, a universal spirituality common to all beliefs, strands of it running through.